Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming this evening. And I'm very pleased we have such a good turnout for this evening's topic, which is obviously very timely. I do want to introduce over here Governor Romney on the left, who's joined us for discussion of the candidacy, and President Obama is here with us tonight. And but seriously, we're very privileged also to have Ambassador Attaché from Iraq here, and Ambassador Peter Kmetz, who's a Slovak ambassador to the United States, who was just sworn in maybe 2 weeks ago, right? And so we're very honored to have both of you here with us tonight. As you all know, this is a face-to-face conversation tonight. Again, thank you for coming. And the face-to-face programs are really designed not so much to put our message from the American Embassy out in terms of what is the administration policy. It's really more to have a discussion or a conversation on all sides of different issues. And so, for example, we had a program last month on Afghanistan, and there were critics on the program and people who had different points of view about the issue. So this is the purpose of our face-to-face. So I'm very happy to have you here, particularly in this very nice venue. So obviously this election is very interesting because it's been kind of a little bit of a seesaw, where maybe a month ago we would have said that yes, President Obama is definitely going to win, but now with the recent debate, things are more even maybe in the race. And now tonight there's going to be a debate between the Vice President Biden and the candidate on the Republican side, Ryan, who's the chairman of the House Budget Committee. So then there will be two more debates, one on foreign policy by the presidential candidates, one on foreign policy, and a third one. So often in American elections, so much, and the congressman can speak to this more with greater authority than I can, but many times these elections are decided even in the last days before, what is the mood of 2 or 3 days before the election. But I think that it is one thing that I want to encourage you to do in your questions, and we do hope there will be some good questions from the audience, is that our system of elections is not always clear, even to Americans. Even to us Americans, to we Americans, it's confusing sometimes. How does the Electoral College work? How does the campaign financing work? So please feel free not only to ask about what's happening with the debate in our country between the Republicans and the Democrats and what the philosophical arguments are, but also please, you should feel free to ask questions about, how does our system actually work? And we'll all learn something. So we're very honored to have two former congressmen here, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt Miller and our public affairs staff to introduce the distinguished two ex-congressmen who, one from the Republican Party, the other from the Democratic Party. And they do a great job traveling around explaining our system election, which is not often, as I say, not easy to explain. So we're very grateful to have them both here, and we're grateful to have you all here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We are very privileged and proud to have today with us Mr. Larry LaRocco. He is a former congressman from the state of Idaho. He is a Democrat. And also Mr. Scott Klug, a Republican from the state of Wisconsin. Rather than read you off their biographies, I actually like them to sort of introduce themselves. And maybe as you introduce yourself, give us your take on the current state of the presidential race.
Scott's letting me go first. If you don't mind, I stand, and I want to know if the interpreters can hear me okay. And okay. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for this great program that you have. This is one of the series. My name is Larry LaRocco. I'm a Democrat. I served in the Congress from 1991 to 1995. I was the first Democrat elected to the 1st Congressional District of Idaho in 25 years back in 1991. I survived for a couple of terms in a very, very conservative district, a Republican district. In 1994, when the elections were nationalized, in a sense, I lost in that big sweep, and the Democrats lost control of the House of Representatives for the first time in over 40 years. Prior to serving in Congress, I was a stockbroker, and prior to that time that I went into the financial services industry, I served for 6 years as a staff member for Senator Frank Church from Idaho. My time with Senator Frank Church was spent in the state of Idaho working with constituents, and that led me into elected political office because I saw what you could do at the local level, working with people to try and solve their issues, and I felt very positive about the political arena and public service. After Senator Church lost in 1980, I ran for Congress in 1982. I was a young guy. I had a family, and I quit my job and went off to run full-time for Congress. I spent 13 months, and I took jobs for a week at a time throughout the Congressional District of Idaho, which is 500 miles long, 19 counties, and at the end of 8 months, I had 22 different jobs. I was setting up my campaign, organizing it, raising money, getting visibility. But at the end of the campaign, I got 46.5% of the vote and didn't make it. This story is actually pretty common in politics, except for my colleague Scott Klug, who just hit the ground running and won the first time. But I tried to get elected to the state senate, didn't make it, got 47%, and then in 1990, it seemed like the good equity that I had built up over 8 years led me to 2 terms in the House of Representatives. Also, my political experience expanded after that. Not so successfully, I might say, I ran for the United States Senate in Idaho in 2008. Again, Idaho is one of the most conservative states in the in the country, and as a Democrat, it was not an easy road, but nevertheless, the experience was worthwhile, and I think trying to make the two-party system was very valuable. So I come out of the financial services industry and served in Congress, believe in public service, and I have served as the president of the United States Association of Former Members of Congress. It's a group of about 600 former senators and members of the House who still believe in public service, and we have programs both domestically and internationally that focus on talking to people about the value of public service and explaining the role of Congress and how our system works throughout the globe. So now I represent various clients in Washington, D.C., trying to plan for retirement, but I'm staying involved in many, many ways. Let me just give you the second part of Matt's question was a little review on the election here. I don't want to spend too much time because I want to take your questions on this. But I think it's self-evident, just reading the polls right now, that this is a horse race. That the race is within the margin of error, as we call it nationally, whereas President Obama may have an edge in the state of Ohio. I think it's still a very volatile and fluid situation in the United States. I think the ambassador was exactly correct that a couple of weeks ago. I think we would have said that the Democrats maybe were headed to maintain control of the United States Senate, and that it looked like Obama was leading in all of the important states and the remaining states that are what we call battleground states. So it's coming down to about 9-10 states that are very important, and that's where all of the action is right now with the advertising, and I think the candidates are even speaking specifically to the constituencies in these states as they come down to the wire here. My candidate, President Obama, was handed a very difficult economic situation when he took office in 2009. The economy was hemorrhaging jobs, the unemployment rate was soaring, our deficits were going up, we were tied to 2 wars that we were paying for on a credit card, and when George Bush went into office, we handed him a balanced budget, but President Obama was handed a very difficult situation. He had to make some choices on what to do. They moved forward to put together an $800 billion stimulus package, which many economists credit with actually saving the United States from going into a deeper recession or maybe even a depression. And of course, if we had done that, it would not have been good for our country and I think our allies and the economies around the world. So it was saved. Was the stimulus package controversial? In some ways it was, because it did not get one Republican vote as it went through Congress. So it was done by the Democrats, and it was done mainly from their point of view. And I don't totally agree with the package, but it was done at the time. The president also pushed through Obamacare, as we call it now, a health care plan for all Americans. It's been very controversial. It doesn't go into effect until 2014. But I think we all in this modern era are used to instant gratification. We want things to happen quickly. But when you're turning around a $14 trillion economy in the right direction, it takes time. And we've seen the unemployment rate drop from 10% to 7.8%, 7.9%. Consumer confidence is up in the United States. The stock market is rising, and the housing market is coming back. But the question is that good enough for the American people? Do they feel that he has worked hard enough and that he has a plan to take us forward? I think, unfortunately, he didn't articulate that plan moving forward in the best way he could the other day. I think we saw a new Mitt Romney show up at the debate, sort of like, who is this man? We've been seeing somebody for a year debating and with the Republicans, trying to move to the far right, and he showed up a different person. And I think that was confusing for the president, who probably went into that debate and said the principle would be do no harm. And he didn't want to be condescending. He didn't bring up some of the issues that are talked about in the negative advertising going on. I'll just touch for a minute on foreign affairs because the economy, I think, is number one in the United States. But the president has dealt with the Iraq war, where he said he would end the war and bring the troops home. I think we've done that and stabilized the country. We still have a presence in Afghanistan with a plan in place. Osama bin Laden is no longer a member of this planet, and the tip of the organizational chart of Al-Qaeda has been decimated through, I think, a steady process of eliminating them. But the threat still continues, as we know from recent examples in Libya and, of course, all over the Middle East, where we have problems with terrorism. But I think the president has done a good job in that respect, and I think Hillary Clinton has done an excellent job as Secretary of State. So again, the question is, do we look at a program that's been partially revealed by the secretive Mitt Romney, who won't reveal his tax returns for the last 10 years, who really has not gone into detail on a plan, or do we stick with President Obama as they move forward? I think the debate the other day that happened, not to the benefit of President Obama, has heightened the interest in the debate that's going to happen tonight. I think this puts more pressure on both the Vice President and Congressman Ryan to perform and to explain their positions. So we're moving forward with two different views on how to kickstart the economy, how to move us forward. But I think Mitt Romney is still going to have to be more forthcoming on the plan that he really has for taxes and the cuts that that he proposes, how we're going to balance the budget, deal with the structural issues of entitlements and Medicare and so forth. So these are exciting times in American politics because what happens with this race could affect the down ballot races in the House and the Senate and even further down. So for those of us who like politics, it's a white knuckle ride, it's a gripper. I wish that President Obama was running away with it, but that's not the way it is. We are in for a very exciting 30 days, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks for the opportunity to be with you tonight. Larry and I had the opportunity over the years to visit Czechoslovakia when it was still Czechoslovakia. Larry is a college student, and I actually was active with the German Marshall Fund and was at a conference in Dresden in the mid-90s and took my then 12-year-old with me to the weekend for Prague. But this is the first opportunity either of us have had to be in Bratislava. So thanks for the hospitality and the great weather, and thanks for showing us a wonderful city. So as Larry mentioned, my career path's a little bit different. I spent 14 years as a broadcast journalist in television before I decided to run for politics. I think people have lots of motivations for why they eventually decide to pursue public service. I was actually frustrated, amazingly back then, by yet another debt crisis the United States faced. We'd run up debts throughout the 80s, and we seemed unwilling to deal with them. I thought the country needed a balanced budget amendment, so Congress would have to balance the budget. I thought that the president needed to have a line item veto authority so he could stop wasteful spending, and I'm a big believer in term limits. I think that the United States system was designed for people to have careers before politics and careers after politics. So I ran, beat somebody who had been in office for 32 years, pledged that I'd served no more than 12 years, and actually quit at 8, which is a comment on what I thought about the job, but we can talk more about that later. So here's my prejudices as I view this, and you know, I have an MBA. I've been involved in running businesses, and I look at the presidential elections essentially as President Obama was the CEO of the company, and we were the board of directors deciding whether or not he needed a new term. And I think by any objective measure, he's failed. You know, we've had essentially nearly 8% unemployment for the last 4 years. We spent $800 million on a stimulus program, most of which wasn't even used to stimulate the economy. Only about 20% of it went to two, you know, sort of true infrastructure projects to get things rolling. A lot of the money was sent by Congress to state governments to backfill their treasuries because of a crisis. And all that really did was prevent teacher layoffs and public employee union layoffs in, you know, San Francisco or Phoenix or Columbus, Ohio, or wherever it might be. And consequently, sort of 600 of the $800 million went nowhere. The president passed a health care policy, a single Republican vote, and a major overhaul of, you know, 16 or 17% of the U.S. economy. Contrast that with Ronald Reagan. When he was in office, he managed to pass significant tax overhaul and economic reform with, you know, Congress essentially run by the Democrats. So the spirit of bipartisanship, I think, is going to be a real issue for the president going forward. You know, from my perspective, the presidential race really sort of focuses around three things. First of all, the economy. I think most people were amazed that the president in his first debate never talked about the private sector, never talked about entrepreneurs. He talked about government programs. And I think that's one of the reasons the American public caught its breath the other night and said, wait a minute. Larry mentioned Mitt Romney's secretive nature. I think the big secret that the president needs to let us in on is what his plan is for the next 4 years. And how is it different than the last 4 years? And I don't really think there's an answer to that. I think the United States needs an overhaul of the tax code. You know, we have millions and millions of dollars stuck overseas because American companies pay severe penalties if they repatriate that money to the United States. It's, you know, stuck all over the place, in Japan, in Thailand, in South Africa, in Great Britain, in Argentina. And if we had a tax system that allowed them to bring it back, they could invest in jobs and invest in equipment. We have among the highest corporate tax rates in the world, and we've got a regulatory environment in which companies are afraid to hire people. But not only has the administration been aggressive in pushing new regulations, they set up, when they're worried about the banking sector not loaning money to the private economy, they set up yet one more government agency to oversee financial institutions. So there's too much regulation. And the final leg in that sort of three-legged stool, I think, will be on show tonight. And that's if the United States is going to have any ability to cut its deficit, it has to aggressively reform and attack entitlement programs. Social Security, the United States program aimed for seniors, is in severe financial trouble. Medicare, which is the federal program aimed at protecting seniors over the age of 65, is at an extraordinarily rapidly climbing rate that simply is unsustainable. Medicaid, which is the state program which takes care of folks who need medical attention on the state level, has a similar crisis. When Paul Ryan was first picked as vice president, there was a sense and sort of a gasp that Romney had committed political suicide. He picked somebody who put together the Republican budget plan, which attacks entitlement reform. The interesting thing today is if you look at the polls, Mitt Romney is substantially outperforming President Obama with people over the age of 65. Seniors understand these programs need to be overhauled, and they're no longer scared that reforming the programs means ending the programs. So I think that's the crucial issue tonight to watch in the debate between Vice President Biden and between Paul Ryan. Now, take everything I say going forward with a grain of salt. When I was in Congress and was leaving in 1998, this young 26-year-old staffer from Sam Bravak's office came in to see me from Wisconsin named Paul Ryan and started thinking about running for Congress, and I said, you shouldn't do it yet. And he completely ignored everything I said, ran for Congress and got elected when he was 28. When Paul went to run as vice president, he took 2 staffers along from his office to help run his campaign, and both of the staffers used to work with me when I was in the United States Congress. So he's a Wisconsin kid who I'm anxious to watch sparkle tonight. So what's happened, I think, is that for a long time, Americans were essentially trying to evaluate this race in an atmosphere with a barrage of negative attacks from both sides. And I think what you saw the other night was 25 million more Americans turning into this debate than tuned in 4 years ago. And I think what they needed to know was that there was a credible alternative to President Obama, who had a specific plan to attack what's wrong with the country's economy and to move the nation forward. And as you've seen over the last week and a half, the polls for President Obama have collapsed just about everywhere. He still has a narrow lead in a number of battleground states, but the last 3 national polls released in the last 24 hours, Mitt Romney's leading in all 3 of them. So we've got a very different scenario than we might have had we been here 2 weeks ago, and I think it'll be a very interesting month ahead of us. And I think anybody who tells you how it's going to turn out really doesn't have the faintest idea, because none of us do. So it'll be an interesting 4 weeks ahead. Thanks for the chance to be with you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. The first question I'd like to pose to you, you just made an allusion to the tightening of the national race within the last week, and also, because of the peculiarities of the Electoral College system, the importance of the key battleground states. And those include Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and most importantly for Republicans, the state of Ohio. So I'm wondering, because of the Electoral College system, it is not one national election, but in fact 50 statewide elections. And given the diversity of these states, these battleground states, how do certain aspects play differently within the 2 of them? So for example, perception of the auto bailout and unions, for example, is much different in the key state of Ohio than, for example, in North Carolina. So I wonder what some of those differences among these battleground states might have on the ultimate impact and outcome of the election.
First, okay, thanks. Yeah, so as you know, this is essentially an election of 50 different individual state elections. And why do we have this sort of wacky system? Well, the Founding Fathers wrestled for a long time during the formation of the United States government between power with states that didn't have very much population and states that had large population. And the sense was, if you cede too much to the states with lower population, you do it at disadvantage to the majority, but similarly, if you didn't provide some kind of protection, the big states would just completely run over the other states in the then 13 colonies. And as you know, what came out of that was the bicameral system in the United States Congress, where states have the representation in the House based on population. So Larry's home state of Idaho has 2 representatives, California has 53. But California has 2 senators, and Idaho has 2 senators. And that was the balance that was struck. Similarly, our Founding Fathers thought it made sense to make each of those individual competitions so people would focus on individual states rather than just running a national campaign. You're exactly right. There's 12 or 13 states in play, and they're all very different. And interestingly, in some of those states, President Obama is still up by a percentage point or 2. The sort of good news for the Romney campaign is that it now looks like he's surging ahead in Florida and still surging ahead in Virginia. But in Ohio, there are some real issues. And Ohio's an interesting state because the northern part of it is very unionized, sort of Rust Belt Democratic. The southern part of Ohio, Cincinnati, almost plays more like northern Kentucky than it plays like Ohio. And so Ohio itself is fractured. And so the one thing that I think works to the Mitt Romney's advantage is that there's now a Republican governor in Ohio. The one thing that works to Mitt Romney's advantage is there's now a Republican governor in Wisconsin. So in a number of those battleground states, you have fairly sophisticated infrastructures that will supply a good ground game to help Romney sort of manage to cut through that. President Obama is still up in Nevada. Mitt Romney is now ahead in Colorado. And President Obama is still up in Wisconsin, and he's still up in Iowa, but Romney's now closed Pennsylvania to a 2-point race. So it's going to be very interesting going forward, and I think each of those states has its own very distinct flavor. Years ago, a reporter for the Washington Post wrote a book called The 9 Nations of North America, which I think, for those folks in this room who have been visitors to the United States, you'll appreciate that New York City is a very different place than Alabama, and Miami is a very different place than Seattle, and along the way you go. So I think what the Romney campaign will depend on are many of those states have Republican governors, and many of those Republican governors have the machinery in place to help deliver. My home state of Wisconsin, just last point, very controversial in the last year and a half. Our governor came in and passed legislation that essentially forced public employee unions to pay more money for their benefits, more money for health care, and in some ways severely negotiated their bargaining authority. For only the third time in United States history, there was an attempt to recall a sitting governor. Governor Walker originally won that race by a little more than 52%. He actually won the recall election by 55%. And in a sign of just how confused my home state is, President Obama was actually up 6 points in the same poll that was taken over Governor Walker. So you see these sort of mixed messages in all the states, and I think it's going to be very difficult to sort out. I can tell you, for those of us who are in Wisconsin and in much of those battleground states, we've been overwhelmed by the amount of advertising, phone calls, polling. It's been incessant. And I think one of the reasons you've seen this huge surge in interest in the debates, paradoxically, is there's been so much information out there. As I described it earlier today, you want to have a conversation or listen to an informed debate. This is like being stuck in a traffic jam with people blaring horns for the last 4 months. So I think the opportunity to turn on the debate was the first opportunity everyone had to listen to it unfiltered and just get a sense of the measure of the people. And I think that's what sort of set the stage, I think, for an awfully interesting closing 30 days.
I think Scott has given a good description of the state of play in these battleground states, so I don't need to repeat that. I think his description of the closing of the polls and so forth, I cringe a little bit when I hear the word surge, but he could be, he's moving, and he's moving in the right direction, but it's closing. Now, he covered a lot of ground here, so I'll make a couple of points. And that is that in my state of Idaho, for example, which is so red, and it's obviously going to go for Romney, that we don't have all the noise of the campaign there. There's no money that's going to be spent there on the advertising. So these pockets of quiet are going on all over the United States. Those states are relatively set. Now, there is a factor in these battleground states that I think is the advantage to the president. And that is that I think they anticipated this a long time ago. The fact that the president is even in play right now with the tough economic conditions in the country is pretty remarkable in a lot of ways. So they anticipated that, and so they have sent in teams of people to work on the ground in these states in terms of doing calling, registering voters, and getting the Obama voters out to vote. And that's going to be a key factor. It's just good old-fashioned meat and potatoes politics. If you have a voter who supports President Obama who doesn't get out to vote, then you've lost in the election if you're not getting your vote out. So they've been doing this in a very systematic way, and I think they've anticipated in a proper way where there would be problems, and they put legions of people on the ground. The other thing in some of these states is going to be voter blocks for example, the Hispanic vote. We've mentioned a couple of states like Colorado and Nevada. And the Hispanic population has grown dramatically in these two states. The president has been doing very well with Hispanics. The Republican Party has not done very well with Hispanics. They're starting to grow a bench, if you will, or a slate of candidates who are fairly attractive with Hispanic surnames and backgrounds and so forth. But the fact is that the Democrats have had programs on immigration and paying for college for Hispanics who were born in the United States. That resonates very well with the Hispanic population. So that could play a role in states like Nevada and Colorado. But again, they've got to get the vote out. So I totally agree with Scott that all of the noise that has been happening and the negative advertising has really focused on the debates where Americans can see two individuals standing up side by side and speaking to one another. And I must say that the general consensus was after the debate, whether you forget about who was the winner and the loser, the debate was good. It did cover a lot of territory. Romney was a little bit was more aggressive. He was more on the attack than Obama was. But in terms of having a civil discourse, everybody gave that exchange high marks, which is, I think, favorable. And as has been mentioned, the turnout was unbelievable. So we'll have to see if that continues for the next debate.
Thank you. And in fact, Larry, you raised my next point, which was the importance of party infrastructure and voter turnout. But also we hear often about the importance of voter enthusiasm. And to what impact did the debate last week change that trajectory of voter enthusiasm? I've seen media reports that because of the debates, Republicans are much more enthusiastic now about Mitt Romney, and that some Democrats may be somewhat discouraged by the performance of President Obama. Can this sort of enthusiasm have an impact on the ultimate outcome of the election?
Well, the simple answer is yes, it can. For the reasons that I mentioned, if you have a supporter who doesn't vote, or doesn't tell their neighbors to vote, or doesn't go to see their grandmother in the nursing home or whatever and get them to vote, you know, all of these things matter. And you've got to be talking to people and your neighbors and knocking on doors and making sure that they get there. First of all, there was registration and then the absentee ballot. There are many states now that are voting by mail. And so the voting has already started in the United States at this time in more than 30 states. So the enthusiasm gap, as they call it, is measured. And you look to who the supporters are and whether they plan to vote. And you can measure the intensity of their feelings towards a candidate or the other. I will go out on a limb and say that on the Republican side, the bar was very high for the challenger, Mitt Romney, to come into the debate and do well. And he met that challenge very well. He had a bad couple of weeks before that. It was released, you know, the video of him criticizing 47% of Americans for being moochers, essentially, and just being on, you know, caring that the government gave them money, and that he was dismissing 47%. It was so bad that it worked for the Obama campaign, and they used it in an ad. And so there was criticism from the conservative press, and they were calling for you know, the dismantlement of this committee and you know, heads to roll and a change with his campaign structure and message. And so he went into the debate with all of that noise going about, and he had the composure to do that. I must say, as an observer of politics, I was following Mitt Romney's schedule for the last month, and I'd see that he would take a day off or part of the day, and I knew exactly what he was doing. He's a very organized guy, and he was going off and he was getting ready for debates. What I was worried about was that the president was doing all of his presidential duties, dealing with the situation in Libya and all of the crises that he deals with, and that the people around him were not impressing upon him that this was going to be a very meaningful debate. It was going to be challenging. Had to have a message and so forth. So I think that's what happened. But this enthusiasm gap is quite important, and we'll have to see on election day whether the ground forces have really worked to get the vote out. And I suspect on the Romney campaign, where they are moving people around to go into these different states, changing their advertising budget and buys, if you will, on where they're running TV ads, and adjusting their strategy accordingly.
So as you, I think I said earlier, I dragged one of my boys to Prague with me on one trip overseas. I have 3 of them, and they're sort of interesting in terms of their personal politics. My youngest is a junior at the University of Minnesota. He's sort of my Save the Planet kid in the crowd. Wants to go to law school to be an environmental lawyer. He does stand-up comedy, so it's an interesting mixture. My middle one graduated from Minnesota a year ago, and my oldest, and my middle one is sort of in the middle, and my oldest is 26 and actually works for Governor Walker, so I've got sort of the whole curve covered. But the interesting thing for my son, who's now 20, and for my son who's just out of school, who's about 23, is the enthusiasm for Obama is nothing like it was 4 years ago. So I've been to every presidential inaugural since the late 1980s, and I didn't go 4 years ago, not as a statement on the president, just because I know how crazy Washington was going to be. I mean, it's hard to find rooms in an inaugural. It was unbelievable. I think the biggest crowds in Washington for an inaugural since John Kennedy was sworn in the 1960s. And sort of that surge of support among young people, the surge of support, so I'm using your surge word again, Larry, the rush of support for from the African American community, my time done? Was unprecedented. I don't think that same level of enthusiasm is anymore. In fact, you can see it in the polls, it's diminished. The same sort of question about the African American community, and if the turnout can begin to match what had happened 4 years ago. So intensity really, really does matter. As I said earlier, you know, there's sort of good signs for Romney and warning signs for Romney, good signs for the president and warning signs for the president. I think the crucial thing for the president has been his inability to get above 50% in most polling. And why that's important is if you say, you know, do you want Larry LaRocco or do you want somebody new? You know, usually what you'll see is, you know, for a normal incumbent, if things are going well, Larry would be up 52% to 45%, and some undecideds would be in there. When I first ran and beat somebody who'd been in for 32 years in office, I had 46% were for the long-standing incumbent, 46% was for the new person, which was me, and 8% was undecided. And when the election was done, I got 46% plus 8%, 54%. Undecideds rarely break for the incumbent, because they already know the incumbent, and if they were happy with the incumbent, they'd already be there. So I think the challenge for President Obama in a lot of these battleground states, even the states where he's up right now, he's rarely above 46 or 47%, and that's a lot to capture on election day. And I think if you look at lots of indicators about enthusiasm for the Romney campaign versus the Obama campaign, there's going to be a lot of challenges, and if you look at early absentee voting as an indication, in some states like Florida, you have to register as a Republican or register as a Democrat. But early absentee voting in 3 or 4 critical states, the numbers are dramatically higher than they are for the Republican, for the Democrats voting by absentee. So again, it's still a long way to go. You know, and given the choice, I'd much rather be where the president was 2 weeks ago than where either of the candidates are today. But a lot of the sort of trends and numbers are moving in Romney's direction.
Matt, I just want to say quickly that I think that the performance the other day by the president has been a wake-up call for the Democrats, and I think they're coming out of their slumber and their sleep, and I think it has scared them to death.
Well, I want to talk about some of the new impacts on both the political system and in particular the elections this year. In the wake of the Citizen United decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, we've seen a rise in outsider money coming into the political system, and particularly the creation of these super PACs. Maybe you can briefly touch on what exactly they are and how this might impact the elections.
So the Supreme Court, in talking about campaign financing years ago, said that if you support a candidate, you have a number of options in front of you. You can help host a party, you can take petitions around house to house, you can put a sign up in your yard, you can hold a rally, or you can write a check to an individual campaign. That's been the position of the Supreme Court consistently. Last year, or 2 years ago, I guess it is now, the Supreme Court essentially extended that same right to contribute to campaigns to both unions and to corporations. A number of my top Democratic colleagues are aghast because there's now so much money on the Republican side. In 4 years ago, when Obama had a financial advantage, they weren't rushing out to return checks. So I'm not quite sure how much of this is on principle and how much of it is just a competitive disadvantage right now. But what you've had now is the creation of these large political action committees, not tied to candidates, that can raise corporate dollars and come in and advertise the campaigns. I think there was a sense for a long time this would tilt the playing field one way or the other. I'll go back to what I said earlier. All it's done is made the campaigns a lot louder and a lot noisier. I'm not really sure when all of this settles out whether the super PACs are really going to have a dramatic effect at all. As I said earlier, I have a good friend of mine who used to do movie reviews, and he used to say if one guy slips on a banana peel, it's funny, but if 100 guys slip on a banana peel, it's not 100 times funnier. And at some point, there's simply diminishing returns to all of this advertising. Again, I'm in a battleground state. I must get, I'm not exaggerating, 50 pieces of mail a week from political candidates, most of which are from the Romney campaign or the Senate campaign in my state. I must get, during the week, you have what are called robocalls. Those are automatic calls where people will call you to check on polling and raise money. I probably get 25 to 35 robocalls a week. And it's, you know, I'm glad I have a U-verse cable so I can go back and forth and avoid all the political commercials. I think that's what's going on in a lot of places. So from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure the sort of growth of super PACs and these new changes in campaign finance will really have any significant effect on the campaigns, except they've been longer and noisier and just overwhelmingly frustrating.
I take the view that it was a terrible decision by the Supreme Court, just one of the worst in the history of our country. One of the reasons for this is that this isn't just about the presidential elections. It's about congressional elections. It's about elections at the local level, municipal elections, county elections, state elections, gubernatorial elections. So it simply means that if some well-meaning and articulate and effective legislator does something that a large corporation doesn't like, then they can pour millions of dollars into that race and really upset what's going on at the local level. So I think it's really out of kilter, and there are some super PACs that are now getting involved in judicial elections in the United States, which makes my point. So I think it's bad. People focus on this as just a presidential phenomenon, but it does go down to the local level. I think at the end of this campaign, the American people are going to speak in some fashion, whether they like this experience to have these billions of dollars involved in the political process, and whether it was really healthy for the discourse or harmful. One thing that I know Scott and I agree with on this issue is that the magnitude and the force of these super PACs can actually come in and instead of working against your opponent, they can come in and let's say they work against. Well, okay, let me rephrase this. As a candidate, you get involved in the campaign. You have your own message, you have your own budget, and you have your agenda that you want to push. 1, 2, 3. Let's say it's economy agenda, or economy, environment, and human rights. And so those are the three things that you push. And then a super PAC might come in who thinks that they're your friend to defeat your opponent, and they come in and talk about another issue that is totally off your agenda. So you could lose control of your own campaign based on the sheer magnitude and force of the super PAC. And I think that's going to keep people out of the political process. Now we're seeing at the tail end of this campaign in states like Montana, where there are fewer people than Idaho, if you can imagine, there are only about 700,000 people there, where the control of the Senate could be in the balance with this race between a congressman and the incumbent senator. And the money is just flooding into this small and populated state. And I don't know how much money will be spent per vote, but it is disproportionate to what Montanans are normally used to. So the jury is out on what the verdict is going to be on the super PACs. I think they did hurt Romney in the primaries, actually, because the message was so negative when he had to defeat Newt Gingrich down in the South in South Carolina that Mitt Romney had to really repair his reputation in a way, to show the positive side of him rather than the negative portrayal that was suggested by him being so tough and intemperate, emotional, and negative.
Well, thank you, Larry. You actually raised one of the issues I wanted to talk about next, and then I'd like to open it up to our audience to hear from them. You talked about some of the other races that are occurring in this election, not just the one between Obama and Romney for the presidency. We have all 438 of our representatives who are up for election, and we have 1/3 of the 100 senators up for election. Currently, the Republicans control the House of Representatives. The Democrats control the Senate, although they do not have a filibuster-proof majority of 60. What are the likelihood that either of these houses might change? And I know, Scott, that in fact your former House seat is the person who followed you in that place is running in a very important race for one of the Senate seats from the state of Wisconsin. So maybe you could touch on some of the importance of those races in the House and the Senate, and the likelihood that either or both might change.
Good question. I think before the first debate, Democrats were a little giddy. I think the president was showing very well in the polls. Battleground states, there's suggestions that the Republicans, the super PACs, getting to that question he asked earlier, might even pull out of the presidential race to a great degree and then devote their money to the down ballot races and just say the presidency is lost. We're going to go after the Senate and we're going to go after a higher majority in the House. And really, the first debate changed all of that. I mean, that's the magnitude and the power of that performance and what happened on that day. And so now, I think a lot of the money is staying with the president, but some is not as much as going down in these down ballot races. Now, if I were to make a prediction, this is strictly a prediction, maybe thinking more with my heart than my head, but I think that the Democrats might control part of the Senate. I think they will, maybe by one vote. But you have to look at these individual races that are, you had a House member in Missouri who made a stupid statement about legitimate rape, and all of a sudden the Republicans just headed for the door. They were pulling their money from him, and then they thought that they would force him out of the race, and he stayed in the race. Now the money's coming back in. So at one point you thought that Missouri, this guy's from Missouri, was going off in the Democratic column. I can't say that today. He's running against an incumbent senator, but it's starting to tighten there. And you have a race in Nevada where there's a tough race. You have this race in Montana, North Dakota has just pulled even. I think we'd all agree, Scott and I would agree, it's at 47-47 by all the polls. This is really coming down to the wire. And so the candidate in Florida looked like he was doing well. So there are about 9 Senate races. They don't exactly correspond with the battleground states for the presidency, but in some cases they do. So that the outcome of the presidential race could determine the outcome of the Senate. The House, I think, will stay in Republican hands. I think the Democrats will pick up a few seats, but I don't think there's a chance that the Democrats will regain control of the House at this point.
I agree with Larry. I think the Republicans are going to have to be awfully lucky, and there's going to have to be a sort of giant wave that I don't think you can realistically see coming at this point. Although it might. I'll give you one example. The ambassador's home state is Ohio. He's from Cleveland. And there's a Democrat who's been a senator from Cleveland for 2 terms, who Larry and I both served with, Sherrod Brown, whose politics I don't agree with, but I played basketball with Sherrod over the years, and he's a buddy. Republicans thought they had sort of a rising star as a competitor, and about 2 weeks ago I looked at the race just to see what was going on, because if you're in politics, these just aren't sort of names on a page. They're friends and folks you've known over the years. And I think at that point, Sherrod was up 12 or 13 points. Well, in the last couple of days, that race has now collapsed to 3 points because of Romney's better performance. Let me give you 3 races to watch that night, which I think could be bellwethers. The first one's Ohio. We'll see whether Sherrod Brown wins or doesn't win. I think we're now at a point where if Romney wins, Ohio probably goes to the Republicans. There's a slim chance it could, a good ticket split. But I think that's one to watch early in the night. The second race to watch is in Virginia, where George Allen is running against Tim Kaine. George Allen was in office. He was a House member in our class. He ended up getting his district changed. The Virginia legislature made his life very hard. He was the son of a very popular coach of the Washington Redskins. And so he got mad and actually ran and won as governor of Virginia. And everybody expected him to be a great candidate for Senate 6 years ago, and he completely shot himself in the head on a campaign appearance and lost. Similarly, Kaine had been way up in that race, Allen had been trailing, and now that race is essentially closed, a statistical dead heat. And then the third one to watch, which will be interesting from my own vantage point, is Tammy Baldwin replaced me in Congress. Tammy is the only openly gay and lesbian member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Tammy's in her, I think, mid to late 40s. And she's running against a very one-time popular governor of Wisconsin, Tommy Thompson, who was elected for 4 terms, left to become an HHS secretary. And everybody thought this would be an easy victory lap for Tommy. He had a very difficult, crowded 4-way primary, and he won narrowly with 33%. Next guy was 31. The next one was 31. And I think had it not been a crowded primary, he wouldn't even made it through. But so he came out of the primary broke. Tammy did an excellent job defining him. She went way ahead, and now that race is closing as well. So that's a race you may want to watch that night. The interesting thing about Thompson is it has very little to do with politics. It has to do with his age. He's 69 years old. We're actually hosting an event for Tommy next Tuesday in Milwaukee. And I got 3 emails today from partners of mine in my law firm who said, I can't vote for anybody who's going to be 70 when he gets sworn in. He won't be in Washington long enough to make a difference. And these are from guys who are Republicans. So it's an interesting contrast between somebody who you would think, a lesbian running from Madison, can she really win in sort of the Midwestern heart of the country? Here's a governor with a great pedigree, a former governor with a great pedigree. But at this point, I think that race, like Ohio and like Virginia, is likely to go the same way the presidential race will be. President Obama won Wisconsin handily last time, 8 or 9 points. But if you look at the Bush Gore race, the Bush-Kerry race, it was a 1-point race in Wisconsin. I think it's likely to be it that way. And it'll be interesting to see which way it splits. So as you're sort of watching election results that night, watch those 3 races, because I think that'll tell you what's going to happen with the U.S. Senate. But if I had to put $20 on the table to bet, I think the Democrats still gain control.
Thank you very much. I now want to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions they may have for our distinguished guests here today. Feel free to ask in English or in Slovak, whichever you prefer. And just raise your hand if you have a question, and one of my colleagues can come by with a microphone so you may ask.
Thank you both for being here. My question is regarding the women vote. Over the last 4 years, the Republicans have passed a lot of legislation to restrict women's reproductive rights. And the House of Representatives, the Republican members have refused to pass the Violence Against Women Act to renew it. And so my question is just what are the candidates offering to women? And I think before the last debate, Obama had, I think it was like a 16% lead in women. And so I just wonder whether you think that gap can be closed, Representative Klug. And so thank you.
Sure, and as of the 3 polls this morning, it's tied among women. Yeah, so I think that women don't necessarily vote on narrow issues. I think they vote lots of stuff. And I think right now they're worried about pocketbooks. They're worried about how their kids are going to pay for college. They're worried about a job. They're worried about health insurance and lots of other things. In sort of full disclosure, I'm a pro-choice Republican. I'm most primarily a libertarian. I don't think the government has the right to make lots of decisions for people. As I said earlier, I think the government, which governs best, governs least. But at the same time, I have to tell you that I disagree with you that I don't think this is a driving force for most folks. And people would come to my office, and if you look at stuff, there's sort of 7% hardcore on one side, 7% hardcore on the other side, and about 85% of the people don't want to talk about abortion whatsoever. So I think at the end of the day, you know, the Republicans are going to get the hardcore pro-life folks, the Democrats are going to get the hardcore pro-choice votes, and everybody else is going to vote on all the other issues in the world that matter more to them, primarily economics. So that's my perspective.
I think the worst thing I could do is sort of put women into, you know, a certain category, you know, and say that they would vote as a bloc. But let me go out on a limb and say that from an economic standpoint, I think at least in American families and mine, you know, the wife and the mother is generally the nurturer and the caregiver and pays the bills for, you know, and watches and worries a lot. And I think that they're very worried about the economy and where things are going. I think Barack Obama came across as caring. I think his health care program reached a lot of women, and then you know, the Republicans came up with this terrible issue about contraception, you know, and whether, you know, Obamacare was going to take away somebody's right to contraception, or was going to mandate that Catholic affiliated or religiously affiliated organizations, you know, mandated contraception, you know, for their members. So it was an issue that I think was just raised to go after the Catholic vote. But this issue that I mentioned with Congressman Aiken, where he talked about legitimate rape, I think really profiled a lot of conservative Republicans. A presidential candidate that served with Scott and me in the House of Representatives, Congressman Santorum, Senator Santorum, who ran for president. He does not believe in abortion, even in cases of rape or incest, and so it sort of forced Romney into a different position. He's moderated his position somewhat, and there's been a controversy about what he said the other day and then what a staff member said about abortion. So I thought we were going to stay away from that debate in the campaign, but there have been various elements in the Republican Party that have resurfaced it. So we don't, I mean, other issues of voting rights and so forth don't come into play. Sometimes I think on the Hispanic vote that abortion, because of the religious beliefs of many Hispanics, plays against the Democrats. But we'll have to see how he's still doing very well there. So I think the best thing that the candidates can do to speak to women is speak to them about their opportunities and to talk about the middle class and talk a little bit forthrightly about the income disparity in the United States and that women have opportunities to move upward in the economic system without impediments. And I think the president has an excellent record there. I haven't seen the polls that Scott quotes. I don't doubt them because the race is so fluid right now. But prior to the debate, the president held meaningful advantage with women. I think because of abortion, choice, access to contraception, economic mobility, and concern for the environment and other things like that.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question from the audience?
Thank you very much. I'm David Zalter. I'm from the University of Economics. I'd like to thank you two gentlemen for being here. It's quite a distance from the United States. So my question would be about, I was lucky enough to spend the last summer in Washington, D.C., and the big debate was about the debt ceiling. And the media covered it the way that the biggest obstacle to passing was a big polarization between the two parties. That they just wouldn't get along and wouldn't communicate. And then later on, when it was finally passed, they talked that because John Boehner and Obama finally started talking more and understanding each other more. So do you think that after either of the candidates are elected, Mitt Romney or Obama, are they going to face a very divided Congress, or is there going to be more communication between the two parties? Thank you.
It's really a good question because it's really the future of America and whether we can come to grips and deal with the critical issues that we just need to do. And we need to set an example to the world in terms of our budgets and move forward. The approval rating for Congress right now is somewhere between 10 and 13%. That's the lowest level it's been since they've been measuring that sentiment in the Congress. When I lost in 1994, the approval rating of Congress was 25%, which was the lowest it had been, and now it has been consistently below 20%. So people are not happy with the performance of Congress, and they feel that something's got to be done. Now, what happens in the debate, whether they're debating on the stage or you're debating through the airwaves on an advertising or surrogates, is that who's to blame for this? Did President Obama reach out enough? Was he too detached? Did he want the Republicans to come to him? Or were the Republicans too hardline, too ideological, and that they were set in their ways and that they wouldn't move towards his position? And frankly, it's probably a little bit of both, but I'll make 2 points. One is that we have a group in the United States called the Americans for Tax Reform. And that group sends out pieces of paper and pledges that they ask members of Congress and state legislators to sign that they would pledge never to raise taxes. Never. And most of the members on the Republican side have signed it. From a personal perspective, I don't know why anybody would sign that. I wouldn't give my vote to my wife. I mean, why would I run so hard and give my vote to Grover Norquist, who's running the Americans for Tax Reform? Why should I give him my vote? And how can we say that there is no situation in America or around the world where we should not raise taxes to pay for a war, for example, where we went to war on our credit cards, which cost us almost $3 trillion in the United States, and now we have no plan to pay for that. So you have the Americans for Tax Reform, and you have people who are locked in, and they won't vote for anything. So if the president gives them a balanced package and says that, whatever it is, where it is more skewed, if you will, to cutting programs rather than revenue, they won't do it. They won't raise 1 penny of taxes. And this is a game of arithmetic. It's a game of math. It's not a game, it's a fact. And I think President Clinton made that point very well at the Democratic Convention. It doesn't add up. You can't get there where we need to be just on cuts. And you can't get there, the growth model, I might say, where you say, well, we lower taxes and everything trickles down, has been tried. We had 8 years of that. And so that also gets to the basic question here, should we go back to the Bush years, which handed us a deficit with trickle-down economics, or should we move on with the program that we have? So that's one thing, is an Americans for Tax Reform. The other thing, I think, is that we're going to have a lame duck session after the election, and the Congress is faced with a fiscal cliff because of what they built into pieces of legislation that they passed, that there will be automatic cuts on January 1st, called sequestration, if they don't act. And if they don't act, then the Bush tax cuts would automatically come off. It would automatically raise revenue, but it would also do things that are very dramatic, like cut the military budget, which would be devastating for our country. So the Congress has to make a decision what they're going to do after the election. My own belief is that they will come to some accommodation. I hope what they don't do is kick it down the road and say, well, we'll deal with it in 60 days or 90 days. I hope they deal with it. And I think that this is a time for corporate America to finally say, let's have some certainty, and let's get this economy in place and get on the road, and let's quit dealing with the ideological side of this equation and deal with the math and know that we're going to have to raise some revenues. That's why the president is now calling this economic or economic patriotism. And I think built into that is part of the fact that we have all been, I don't know, we've lived under the umbrella of security that has cost the country a lot. Whether you're a man, a woman, you're poor, you're rich, you're a corporation, or you're not, we have all enjoyed some security recently, but it has cost the United States a lot of money since 9/11. So why don't we all figure out a way to pay for that, get our budgets balanced, and move on and be a model for the rest of the world. So these are some problems that we have. I hope they resolve them.
I actually think regardless of who wins the election, there's going to be an opportunity to get a lot done next spring. I think there's been a lot of pent-up, I think a lot of folks have put stuffs on the shelf until we got through the election we're about to face. I think there's a pretty good possibility we'll begin to deal with the debt issue. I think there's a good possibility we'll do substantial tax reform. And that, there are quiet conversations going on right now between Dave Camp, who's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and Senator Marcus, who's Senator of Finance, to sort of rough out the ideas of what a tax reform package might look like. Historically, years 5 and 6 in the second term of the president can be very productive. Years 7 and 8 in the second term are usually pretty much a waste of time, and that's been true from Bill Clinton to Ronald Reagan, who was saddled with Iran-Contra. Bill Clinton had Monica Lewinsky, and sort of the last years are always bad. So I do think if anything's going to happen, it will happen in the next 18 months, and I think in particular you may see between next January and next June a lot getting accomplished in Washington. So I'm actually pretty optimistic just because, as Winston Churchill said, you can trust the United States to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options. And that's sort of where we are.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? And don't be shy.
Thanks for being here. I'm an American from Minnesota, so I'm glad to know that your sons are studying at our university. But living in Bratislava, I know there's some concern among Europeans about the saber rattling that Romney has quieted down on in the last couple of months, but it was rather loud during the summer. I appreciate your commentary on that.
Well, it was interesting to me when Obama got elected. There was this sense that Europe loved the United States until George Bush came along. And I'm old enough that I was in Germany in the mid-1980s when the Germans hated Ronald Reagan because they didn't want Pershing missiles deployed across Europe. So I have a little bit of a jaded view when it comes to America's love affair or hate with American foreign policy. I think one of the elements I disagree with the current administration is I think they were terribly naive when it came to some places around the world. I happen to think Iran is run by really bad guys. I think North Korea is run by really bad guys. And this idea that somehow if you just talk to them, it would be a new world, nothing's really substantially changed. And I give the administration for credit for tough sanctions on Iran. I think they could even be tougher. I think there has to be some candid discussions with your neighbors to the east. I think there's got to be added pressure on the Chinese to rebalance their currency. This situation in North Africa drives me crazy. This sense that somehow some bad movie that was posted on YouTube became the reason that the U.S. consulate was stormed. I just think, facetious. And I think you've now seen the administration backpedaling as fast as they can in the last 2 weeks to try to get the roots of the problem where it was an organized planned attack on 9/11. The consulate had asked for additional security, and they were consistently turned down by the State Department. Let me tell you, one of the guys who I have high hopes for is very close to the Romney administration is Bob Zoellick. Bob used to be number 2 at the State Department. He just left as president of the World Bank. I think he'll likely be in the president's foreign policy inner circle. So I think there's, if I sort of read between the statements, the question is, the saber rattling is one thing. The question is whether you use the saber as the next. And I don't think the administration is going to show much inclination to be reckless going forward. And I think everybody's learned the lesson of Iraq and Afghanistan that once you get into places, it's really hard to get out of places. But that's very different, I think, from being blunt with some of our adversaries. And I think we do have to be blunt with them. And we can't pretend that if we're nice, there's something going to be nice to us. I just don't think the world works that way.
I think in some ways the Republicans have created almost a caricature of the president, particularly on foreign policy, and then they make statements that try and defend their fantasy about what the president has done. For example, his speech the other day at the United Nations was a very powerful speech. And I think the Republicans in some ways would hope that nobody sees the speech on television, and then they would just run ads and make statements against the president and say that he's weak. This narrative that he goes off to the Middle East on an apology tour also drives me nuts, because I don't think that he went to the Middle East and apologized. I think he went to the Middle East, particularly his Cairo speech, was very powerful, and we celebrated the Arab Spring, but we talked about our adversaries there as well. I think we will hear something in the next 3 debates that along the foreign policy line and perhaps along the line that you're suggesting. And that is, Mr. Romney, if you're planning on going to war, please tell the American people. In other words, what are you saying here? You just can't criticize the president without a policy, without coming up with a policy. So what is the difference? I don't think they're far off on Iran, for example. I don't think they're far off on Israel. I don't think they're far off on Syria, if you sat them down and you had a discussion. But the debate goes on, and we use these terms, and they are a little disconcerting, because all it is in the context of a negative narrative on the president, which I think is undeserved. So I get a little concerned about that. I think we should be tough with our adversaries, but I don't think that he's been weak with our adversaries. And I think what we also need to do is to be honest with our allies who are going to go down this road with us. And I think that was a big mistake that we made in Iraq. We were very quick to go in, and the neocons, which I fear, I think Bob Zoellick's a great guy, but I don't know that he's going to have a cadre of people. I fear that the neocons are going to come back in, and that they're going to be able to control Mitt Romney as the neocons did and Cheney did with Bush. So that's what I fear. And when I talk about him being secretive, that's what I mean, is that it's not clear exactly what's happening. So I think your question is a good one.
I know we're ready to go. I just want, if I could make one observation, which I think is interesting. So as I told you, for years I served as a trustee on the German Marshall Fund. I've been involved in a number of programs like these for the State Department. And I sort of one observation to make, that I think there's two schools of American presidents. And I think Europeans prefer one school. And Bill Clinton fits into that school, Woodrow Wilson does, John Kennedy does, I think pretty clearly Barack Obama does. And those are, and I'm not talking about the sort of, are we pushing the healthcare system into European socialism, whatever that, sort of silly debate can be. But I'm talking about the fact that they like their leaders who are nuanced, educated, sort of East Coast elites, and I think to some degree believe much more in the power of world institutions. And then there's another school of American leaders that I think Europeans have always been puzzled by, starting with Teddy Roosevelt. They really didn't get Ronald Reagan. They didn't understand George Bush. And there's sort of two characteristics, and for lack of a better term, I'd call them out of a Western tradition. They tend to favor much more individualism. They tend to be much more believers in aggressive U.S. foreign policy. And it's just sort of a different mindset and a different world sense. So I'm not trying to convince you of anything, but I think that's an interesting prism, because when I hear Europeans talk about presidents, they talk about presidents who are sort of very European. And I think oftentimes Europeans have a hard time understanding who those other crazy Americans are. So just sort of keep that, I think, as an interesting duality to think about.
All right, well, I would like to pose one last question, and then we will break. We have some light refreshments, and so we can actually continue this conversation in the other room. One thing I'd like to mention to Scott is that actually Ronald Reagan still retains a great deal of respect and admiration here, particularly in Slovakia and in many parts of the former Soviet bloc. But my question to you, as we sort of wrap up, what sort of aspects might come into play in the next 26 days? What can we expect? And what impact might the debates tonight, the next two to come, what might all of these aspects have on the ultimate outcome of the election on November 6th?
Let's see, I'm going to answer that question. I want to give you one more state to take a look at. I mentioned it in another answer, but Montana, I think, is a very critical state in the U.S. Senate. I think what we're going to see over the next 26 days, is it 26 days, is going to be Barack Obama becoming more like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton went to the convention, and he explained what Barack Obama had done in the last 4 years better than Barack Obama did. Now, Bill Clinton is great. He was good at the convention, but it's time for Barack Obama to come up and explain his own program in his own words with his own passion and what he has done. And I think Scott is right. He's got to put together a program on how this rolls into the next 4 years. Okay, we did this. We had a tough economic situation. We had tough foreign policy issues. We addressed them in this way. We had a tough relationship with Congress, but here's what he's going to do in the next 4 years. So I think that we're going to see him recalibrate. I think you're going to see a different person. I think you're going to see a focused person, a passionate person, and one that is ready to do battle. I think we're going to see part of that tonight with the Biden debate as his proxy. And that's about it. They have to, it's too late for him to try and win the poll for most popular guy that you want to have a beer with. Now we got to get down to the policy. And that the Americans are going to look at both of these men and say, which horse do I want to ride? Now, I do want to say that in the atmosphere of the United States right now, with 10 to 13% disapproval or approval of Congress, Americans are in a bit of a plate-throwing mood. They will throw people out of office. And there's no sentimental value that somebody is in there. These men have to earn the vote, and so the real work is going to begin now. And the last debate was a wake-up call for the president, and now we're going to see it play out. And finally, I think we're going to see a campaign that is a bit compressed in the way that Britain runs their campaigns, instead of having the perpetual and continual campaign, but it's going to be much more personal with these two upstanding Americans duking it out, fighting it out to become the next president of the United States.
Well, I'll concede the beer question to you since Governor Romney doesn't drink. So, Obama wins that. I think both pizza. Okay, there you go. So both candidates, I think, have challenges ahead of them, and if I can sort of weigh them. I think for President Obama, it's a delicate dance, because what President Obama has to do, it seems to be in these next debates, is to be forceful and push back at Governor Romney and challenge him. But the problem is he's built up this persona for the last 4 years as sort of this nice guy who's above politics. So it really goes against the sort of image in people's heads. And so you can make the case that he's got to do that. You can also make the case that if he does that, it could blow up in his hands and completely poison the weapon. Romney's got a very different task, is that he's got this, a whole bunch of folks last time out who voted for Obama with a sense of hope and inspiration. And again, back to my inaugural story, what Washington was like the day Barack Obama got sworn in is unlike anything I've seen, in my lifetime when I've been following politics. And his personal story's been amazingly compelling for the American people. So Romney essentially has to look at the American public and say, you know what? It's okay that you voted for Barack Obama. You can't say they made a mistake. He just has to say, it's okay that you voted for Barack Obama. Now I need you to consider, has he done a good enough job that you want to change? And if he does it too harshly and essentially challenges people's decisions from 4 years ago and says, you were wrong, people are going to push back the other way and say, no, I was right, we need to give this guy another 4 years. And so both of them have very delicate balances. But I think Larry hit on something early on that I think what may decide this race, you won't even see happen. It's the ground game underneath. Where's the intensity, the absentee ballots, the turnout campaigns, the updraft or downdraft from Senate races? It's going to be a very interesting time to watch. So, with all due respect, I don't think the vice presidential debate will matter much. I don't think the foreign policy debate will matter much. I think the one that's going to matter is the last one, which is actually a town hall meeting like this one, and that'll close the deal one way or the other. For Republicans, I think a lot of us see, and people can challenge us, a lot of us see echoes of what happened in Carter and Reagan. Jimmy Carter was up the first 2 weeks of October, started to slide, and when it slid, it went really bad, really fast. And so the question is if President Obama can defy gravity and bounce back, or if in some ways, the snowball avalanche has already started, that's going to be tough to turn around. Thanks.
Well, to use a political term, I was factually inaccurate by saying that my last question would in fact be the final one. I would like to...
How about if we answer it over there?
Well, just very quickly, your predictions for the outcomes.
Last answer?
Yeah.
Outcomes of the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate.
The prediction?
Predictions, yes.
Easy. Barack Obama by 8 to 10 electoral votes. Democrats 51-49. Essentially, the candidate in Maine is independent, but he'll go with the Democrats. And I think the Democrats pick up 6 seats in the House.
I think the House stays the way it is because there's a number of Democrat races in California, so just sort of by definition, it'll likely stay just about the same it is. I agree with Larry. I actually think the Democrats will hold the Senate by 1 or 2 seats, and I think Romney wins, and my bold prediction is he will not win the Nobel Prize 3 months after he's elected.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming and sharing your thoughts and insights with us. I'd also like to thank the Open Society Foundation. They're our partners in these face-to-face thematic panel discussions that we host generally monthly. I hope you've enjoyed it tonight. If you're interested in more discussions like these, please follow us on Facebook. That's USA and Slovakia. And I'd also like to encourage you to come see one of our films under the program that we have called Hollywood Elects the President. We're halfway through our 6-film series. The next film will be Wag the Dog, and our special guest who will be leading the discussion afterwards is Ambassador Cedric's wife, who is a very delightful woman and should lead a very lively debate following the showing of that film. And I'd like you to join us now for some refreshments, and we can continue this discussion. So thank you very much.